October 14, 1943. RAF Polbrook, England. Lieutenant David Palmer climbed into the cramped cockpit of his B-17 Flying Fortress as dawn broke cold and grey across East Anglia. He was 20 years old. The briefing had ended an hour ago. When the curtain pulled back to reveal the target, the room had filled with groans. Schweinfurt. Again. Between his legs, secured under armed guard until takeoff, sat America's most secret weapon. A 50-pound maze of gears, gyroscopes and mirrors that had cost more to develop than almost anything else in the American arsenal. The Norden Bombsight. They called it the war-winning weapon. The device that could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 4 miles up. Today, Palmer would learn the truth about America's billion-dollar bet on precision. The story of the Norden Bombsight begins not with war, but with faith. Faith technology, faith in precision, faith that modern warfare could be conducted with surgical accuracy, sparing civilians while destroying the enemy's ability to fight. It was a beautiful idea. It was also, in the skies over Germany, largely a fantasy. But to understand how America spent $1.5 billion on a bombing computer that would miss 90% of its targets, you have to understand the man who built it, the doctrine it enabled, and the brutal reality of combat at 25,000 feet. Carl Lucas Norden was born on April 23, 1880, in Semarang, Java, then part of the Dutch East Indies. His father died when he was 5. His mother moved the family back to Holland, where young Carl received a rigorous European education. He attended boarding schools in the Netherlands before enrolling at the prestigious Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. He graduated in 1904 with a degree in mechanical engineering, his mind shaped by Swiss precision and European technical excellence. That same year, at 24, he emigrated to the United States, carrying with him the belief that engineering could solve any problem if you just applied enough intelligence and precision to it. Norden found work with Elmer Sperry, the brilliant American inventor who had pioneered gyroscopic stabilization systems. For 4 years, Norden worked on gyrostabilizers for United States Navy ships, learning the intricate mathematics of keeping instruments steady on moving platforms. But Norden was difficult. Navy personnel would later call him Old Man Dynamite, and the nickname wasn't affectionate. In 1913, after a salary dispute, Norden left Sperry and formed his own consulting company. He was 33 years old, alone, and convinced he could revolutionize warfare. The problem he set out to solve was ancient. It sounds simple. It's not. A bomb released from an aircraft doesn't fall straight down. It maintains the forward velocity of the plane. Wind pushes it. Air density affects its path. The plane's altitude determines fall time. The plane's speed changes the release point. Temperature matters. Bomb weight matters. Even tiny variations in the bomber's angle could send a bomb hundreds of feet off target. During World War I, bombing had been crude. Pilots used notched sights, simple calculations, and massive amounts of luck. Hit rates were abysmal. In 1920, the United States Navy's Bureau of Ordnance approached Norden with a contract. They wanted a precision bombsight, something better than the simple vector calculators then in use. Norden accepted. He would spend the next 11 years perfecting his vision. The work consumed him. He often worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. His religious faith, strict and Protestant, drove him forward. He believed that God invented, but man designed. The bombsight was not invention, it was design. Pure mathematical. The first working prototype appeared in 1923. It was crude by later standards, but it worked. By 1928, Norden had refined the design enough to achieve accuracy within 2% of altitude. At 10,000 feet, that meant hitting within 200 feet of the target. It was revolutionary. The Navy placed an order for 80 production models. The contract was worth $348,000, equivalent to over $6 million today. But this was just the beginning. In 1931, Norden delivered the Mark 15th bombsight. This was his masterpiece. The device combined 3 revolutionary technologies into one compact unit. First, a gyroscopically stabilized platform that kept the sight level even as the aircraft banked and turned. Second, an analog computer that continuously calculated the bomb's trajectory based on altitude, airspeed, wind direction, and wind speed. Third, an autopilot connection that allowed the bombardier to actually fly the plane during the bombing run, making minute corrections that human pilots simply couldn't execute fast enough. Together, these features promised something unprecedented in warfare. The bombsight looked like something from a mad scientist's laboratory. 2,000 individual parts. Gears, motors, mirrors, gyroscopes, lenses and levers, all interconnected in a mechanical ballet of extraordinary complexity. The sight head, the upper unit containing the telescope and computer, was classified secret before the war even began. General Hap Arnold insisted it be removed from aircraft and stored under armed guard when not in use. Bombardiers took oaths. If the plane went down, their orders were clear. Destroy the bombsight, never let it fall into enemy hands. The Navy conducted tests in October 1931. 2 bombsights competed, the older Mark II and Norden's new Mark XV prototype. The results were stunning. The Mark X then scored 23% direct hits. The Mark X50 scored 50%. The Army Air Corps immediately wanted in. They acquired their first Norden Bombsight in 1932, designating it the M4. By 1933, the improved M-series Norden had become standard equipment for America's new generation of bombers. In April 1939, 4 B-17 flying fortresses equipped with Norden bombsights attacked a simulated battleship at Fort Benning, Georgia. The target measured 600 feet by 105 feet. Crews dropped 12 bombs. 10 hit the target. It was a spectacular success. Air Force publicity officers began claiming the Norden could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 30,000 feet. The claim was absurd. The Norden's telescope had only 20 power magnification. You couldn't even see a pickle barrel from 30,000 feet, much less hit it. But the myth was born. What made the Norden theoretically revolutionary was its automation. Before Norden, bombardiers had to manually calculate everything. Hope their mental math was correct, then pray. With the Norden, the computer did the math. The bombardier would sight the target through the telescope. The device would track the target as the plane approached. It would measure the plane's actual ground speed by comparing successive observations. It would calculate drift from crosswinds. It would determine the exact moment of bomb release. And through the autopilot, it would fly the plane on the perfect approach vector. Human error was supposedly eliminated. The reality was far more complex. To use the Norden, the bombardier had to first right the stabilization platform. This involved comparing the platform's attitude to small spirit levels visible through a window, then making adjustments until everything was perfectly level. It was time-consuming and required steady hands. Next, the bombardier dialed in initial settings: altitude, airspeed, bomb type, and weight. Then came the search phase. The bombardier would declutch the computer from the sighting prism, allowing him to scan for the target. Many Nordens included a reflector sight to help with this initial acquisition. Once the target was located, the bombardier clutched the computer back in. Now the Norden started tracking. The bombardier made continuous adjustments. There were separate controls for trail, drift, and range. Trail controlled the vertical axis. Drift controlled the horizontal. Range adjusted for distance. All 3 controls were on the right side of the sight. The bombardier operated them while looking through the telescope with his left eye. It required extraordinary coordination, especially in combat, with flak bursting around the plane and fighters attacking. The slightest involuntary movement could throw off the solution. If the bombardier rose slightly from his seat as bombs released, the change in optical path would affect accuracy. The Norden was brilliant in theory. In practice, it demanded superhuman steadiness under conditions designed to produce terror. The bombsight had another problem. It was expensive. Staggeringly expensive. Each unit cost about $7,500 during the war, equivalent to over $125,000 today. But the real cost was in development. By the end of World War II, the United States had spent $1.1 billion on the Norden Bombsight program. Some sources place the figure as high as $1.5 billion. To put this in perspective, the Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, cost $2.2 billion. America spent roughly half as much on a mechanical calculator for dropping conventional bombs as it did on splitting the atom. Why? Because the Norden enabled a doctrine. American military planners had developed a theory called daylight precision bombing. The idea was elegant. Strategic bombing could win wars without massive ground invasions. But only if you could hit specific targets: oil refineries, ball-bearing factories, aircraft plants, transportation hubs, surgical strikes on the enemy's war-making capacity. The British had tried bombing Germany at night. Their accuracy was terrible. Most bombs fell miles from their targets. Entire cities were hit instead of individual factories. They had the heavily armed B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator bombers. They would fly in daylight, in tight defensive formations, and hit their targets with precision. The Norden was the technological cornerstone of this entire strategy. The strategy rested on several assumptions. First, that bombers in formation could defend themselves against fighters. Second, that American crews could actually achieve the accuracy demonstrated at test ranges. Third, that hitting specific industrial targets would cripple German war production. All three assumptions would prove tragically flawed. The 8th Air Force began operations from England in 1942. Initial missions targeted France. Short-range raids against submarine pens, airfields and rail yards. Results were mixed. The submarine pens were reinforced concrete bunkers. Bombs barely scratched them. Airfields were easy to repair. But intelligence officers wrote optimistic reports. They claimed the Norden was working as designed. Accuracy would improve with experience. What they didn't mention was that these early missions faced light opposition. Everything changed when the bombers went deep into Germany. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched an ambitious double-strike mission. 146 B-17s would hit the Messerschmitt aircraft factory at Regensburg. 230 bombers would attack the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. The missions would occur simultaneously, splitting German fighter defenses. Both targets were nearly 400 miles inside Germany, far beyond the range of escort fighters. The bombers would be on their own. Damage to the Messerschmitt plant was substantial, but 24 bombers were shot down. The surviving aircraft didn't return to England. They continued south to North Africa, executing history's first shuttle bombing mission. The Schweinfurt force launched 3 hours later. The delay was fatal. German fighters had time to refuel and rearm after attacking the Regensburg bombers. They hit the Schweinfurt force with everything. 36 B-17s were shot down, 60 bombers lost in one day, 600 men dead or captured. And Schweinfurt's ball-bearing production? It dropped by 34% for exactly 2 weeks, then recovered. October 1943 was worse. The 8th Air Force lost nearly 90 bombers in just 3 missions during the week before October 14. On that Thursday, 391 B-17s took off to hit Schweinfurt again. The weather was terrible, thick clouds, fog. Crews stumbled through pre-dawn briefings in the cold and dark. When the curtain pulled back to reveal Schweinfurt, the groan that went through the briefing rooms could be heard across the airfields. Some crews had flown the August mission. They knew the defenses, they knew the losses, they went anyway. The P-47 Thunderbolt escorts took the bombers as far as Aachen, just inside Germany. There, at the limit of their range, the P-47s waggled their wings in farewell and turned for home. German fighters had perfected new tactics. Single-engine Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 90s attacked in waves from 12 o'clock high, boring straight through the formations, firing until they had to break away to avoid collision. Twin-engine Bf-110s launched unguided rockets from outside machine gun range, hoping to break up the tight defensive formations. When a bomber straggled, wounded by flak or fighters, German pilots swarmed it, pouring cannon fire into the crippled aircraft until it exploded or spiraled down. David Palmer, the 20-year-old pilot from Polbrook, flew in the middle of this maelstrom. His B-17, the Duchess, shook with every near miss from flak. German fighters flashed past, so close he could see the pilots' faces. Tracers arced through the formation. Bombers ahead of him caught fire, peeled away, spun toward Earth. Some exploded. Others went down controllably, streaming smoke, crews bailing out if they had time. The sky filled with parachutes. Most belonged to Americans. The bombardiers worked through it all. Strapped into the nose of their aircraft, completely exposed, they hunched over their Norden bombsights and tried to maintain steady hands while the world exploded around them. The temperature at altitude was 40 degrees below zero. The Norden's lubricants congealed in the cold. Optics fogged. The army had purchased electrically heated blankets specifically for the bomb sites. Bombardiers wrapped them around the devices, hoping to keep them functional. Many bombardiers wore electrically heated suits themselves. If the heating failed, frostbite came within minutes. At Schweinfurt, the flak was a solid wall of black. German anti-aircraft batteries fired predicted barrages, creating boxes of exploding steel that the bombers had to fly through. Shrapnel ripped through aluminum skin. Hydraulic lines severed. Engines caught fire. Men died at their stations, torn apart by metal fragments moving faster than sound. Through it all, lead bombardiers peered through their Norden sights, making tiny adjustments, waiting for the precise moment of release. When the lead bombardier toggled his bombs, the rest of the formation followed instantly. Thousands of 500-pound bombs tumbled toward the city below. Then came the run-out. Back through the fighters, back through the flak, 200 miles of running combat before P-47s could meet them near the Belgian border. More bombers fell. By the time the 8th Air Force landed back in England, 60 B-17s were gone. Another 17 crashed on landing or were damaged beyond repair. 121 more sustained significant damage. Of the 2,900 men who took off that morning, 642 were casualties, killed, wounded, missing, prisoners. The 8th had lost more than 20% of the attacking force. And the bombing accuracy? Post-strike reconnaissance showed that some bombs hit Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants. Many more hit the city. Residential areas were destroyed. Civilian casualties were high. But the critical question was whether the raid had achieved its strategic objective. Initial reports claimed significant damage to bearing production. Post-war analysis revealed the truth. Germany had massive stockpiles of ball bearings. They received more from Sweden, Switzerland, and Italy. Within weeks, production was back to normal levels. The strategic impact was negligible. The human cost was catastrophic. Black Thursday, as it became known, forced a reckoning. General Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, tried to put a brave face on the losses. He called the loss of 60 bombers incidental. But everyone knew the truth. The daylight precision bombing doctrine was failing, not because of the Norden, not because of the bombers, but because the fundamental assumptions were wrong. Bombers could not defend themselves against determined fighter opposition. Even the best bombardiers could not maintain accuracy under heavy combat conditions. And even perfect accuracy against individual targets could not cripple a modern industrial economy as quickly as planners hoped. After Black Thursday, deep penetration raids into Germany were suspended. The 8th Air Force needed time to rebuild. More importantly, it needed long-range escort fighters. The P-51 Mustang, equipped with disposable drop tanks, could fly all the way to Berlin and back. But in October 1943, only a handful of P-51s were in England. Most were assigned to tactical units. It would take months to build up sufficient numbers for bomber escort duty. In the pause, military planners examined bombing accuracy data. The numbers were devastating. Studies showed that in 1943, only 5% of 8th Air Force bombs fell within 1,000 feet of the aiming point. The average error for 500-pound bombs dropped in Europe was 1,673 feet, more than a quarter mile. Some bombing errors were measured in miles, not feet. The circular error. Probable for the Norden under combat conditions was 1,200 feet. Under ideal test conditions, the Norden had demonstrated accuracy within 75 feet. In combat, it was 16 times worse. Why? The reasons were layered and complex. Europe's weather was almost always terrible. Clouds obscured targets. The Norden was a visual bomb site. If you couldn't see the target, you couldn't bomb it. The British developed radar bombing systems like H-2S and its American derivative H-2X. The 8th Air Force adopted them in late 1943. But radar bombing accuracy was even worse than visual bombing. Using only radar or radio aids, bombing accuracy plummeted to 5% of bombs within 1,000 feet of the aim point. That meant 95% of bombs dropped blind, missed by more than 1,000 feet. Second, altitude. German flak forced bombers to fly higher and higher. Missions that started at 18,000 feet moved to 23,000 feet, then 25,000, sometimes 30,000 feet. Every 1,000 feet of additional altitude degraded accuracy. The Norden's calculations became less precise. Small errors in input data produced larger errors at impact. Wind at altitude was stronger and more variable than wind near the surface. The Norden measured drift, but it couldn't predict how winds would change as the bomb fell through different atmospheric layers. Third, combat conditions. The Norden required a steady bombing run, ideally straight and level for several minutes before bomb release. But straight and level flight over a heavily defended target was suicide. Pilots took evasive action. They jinked, they climbed, they dove, they banked. Every movement threw off the Norden's calculations. The gyroscopic stabilization helped, but it couldn't compensate for violent maneuvering. Flak bursts shook the aircraft. Near misses damaged control surfaces, making it impossible to maintain steady flight. Fighters attacking from the front forced formation changes at the worst possible moment. Fourth, the human factor. Fear, exhaustion, cold. The psychological stress of combat degraded performance. Bombardiers were supposed to make smooth, precise adjustments to the Norden's controls. In combat, with fighters firing and flak bursting and friends dying around them, smooth and precise became impossible for all but the most exceptional individuals. Studies showed that even involuntary muscle tension could affect accuracy. When bombardiers unconsciously tensed as they approached the release point, they rose slightly in their seats. This changed the optical path through the Norden's telescope. Bombs released at that instant went wide. Fifth, the device itself. The Norden was mechanically complex. Maintenance was constant. Gears wore, gyroscopes drifted, mirrors came out of alignment, lubricants thickened in cold, optical elements fogged. Every mechanical failure degraded accuracy. Army air forces had to dedicate thousands of personnel to bombsight maintenance. Even with perfect maintenance, the analog computer at the heart of the Norden had inherent limitations. It could only calculate based on inputs it received. If those inputs were slightly wrong, the solution was wrong. Garbage in, garbage out. The Germans knew all about the Norden. They had known since before the war started. Hermann Lang, a German spy, worked at the Carl L. Norden Company. In 1938, during a visit to Germany, Lang reconstructed the bombsight plans from memory and passed them to German military intelligence. In 1942, other members of the Duquesne spy ring were arrested by the FBI. Lang received an 18-year prison sentence, but by then the damage was done. German engineers had already developed their own version, the Luftwaffe 7. It was similar to the Norden in concept, though simpler in execution. When American bombers were shot down over Germany, Luftwaffe intelligence officers examined the Norden bombsights recovered from the wreckage. They found nothing they didn't already know. The strategic bombing campaign continued despite the Norden's limitations. In early 1944, everything changed. P-51 Mustangs arrived in large numbers. General Jimmy Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force and implemented a new policy. Instead of requiring fighters to stay with the bombers, he turned them loose. American fighters ranged ahead of the bomber formations, hunting German interceptors. They caught German fighters on the ground during refueling. They attacked airfields. In a matter of months, they effectively destroyed the Luftwaffe as an offensive force. By summer 1944, American bombers could operate with relative impunity. With fighter opposition reduced, bombing accuracy improved. By late 1944, the 8th Air Force was putting 25% of bombs within 1,000 feet of the aim point under visual conditions. By 1945, that number reached 40% for visual bombing at lower altitudes. It was still nowhere near the pickle barrel accuracy promised by Norden's marketing, but it was a substantial improvement over 1943. The improvement came not from better bomb sights, but from reduced opposition, lower bombing altitudes, more experienced crews, and tactical innovations. One innovation was the lead bomber concept. Instead of having every bombardier in a formation use his own Norden independently, only the lead bombardier actually aimed. The rest of the formation dropped when the lead bombardier dropped. This reduced the problem of individual bombardier error. If you had one exceptionally skilled bombardier in the lead plane, the entire formation benefited from his accuracy. Of course, if the lead bombardier made an error, the entire formation missed, but statistically it was an improvement. Another innovation was target selection. American planners gradually shifted away from precision attacks on small, specific targets. Instead, they adopted what was euphemistically called area bombing. Rather than trying to hit a single building in a factory complex, they aimed for the entire complex. Rather than trying to destroy a single factory, they targeted entire industrial districts. It was strategic bombing by another name, though military officials were careful not to call it that. The Norden provided the fiction of precision, even when the reality was area bombardment. The oil campaign exemplified this evolution. Beginning in 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces systematically attacked German synthetic fuel production. Oil refineries were large targets. You didn't need pinpoint accuracy to damage them. Thousands of tons of bombs repeatedly hammered the same facilities. Even with mediocre accuracy, the cumulative damage was severe. By late 1944, German fuel production had collapsed. Wehrmacht units were immobilized for lack of gasoline. Luftwaffe fighters sat idle on airfields. This was arguably the most successful strategic bombing effort of the war. But it succeeded through volume and persistence, not precision. The truth about the Norden emerged slowly. During the war, military officials maintained the fiction of precision bombing. They needed to justify the losses. They needed to maintain public support. They needed to believe that the deaths of thousands of young men had achieved something meaningful. The post-war United States Strategic Bombing Survey examined the results systematically. The conclusions were sobering. Strategic bombing had contributed to Allied victory, but not in the way planners expected. The bombing didn't destroy Germany's industrial capacity. German war production actually increased through 1944 despite the bombing. What the bombing did accomplish was forcing Germany to divert massive resources to defense. Millions of men manning anti-aircraft guns and fighters instead of fighting at the front. Millions more repairing bomb damage. Industrial dispersal that reduced efficiency. Psychological impact on the German population. The survey also examined bombing accuracy in detail. Their conclusion was unambiguous. The Norden Bombsight, while technically sophisticated, had not achieved the precision necessary for true surgical strikes. Under actual combat conditions, bombing remained an area weapon, not a precision weapon. Even the more modest claims of hitting within 100 feet from 20,000 feet proved impossible in operational conditions. The Norden worked beautifully on test ranges. In war, it was just another mechanical device, limited by its design, degraded by combat conditions, and ultimately less important than the courage and skill of the men who used it. After World War II, the Norden remained in service. During the Korean War, when radar bombing proved inadequate for attacking North Korean targets, Air Force units dusted off their Norden bombsights. Retired World War II technicians were called back to service to make the devices operational again. The same thing happened in Vietnam. The last combat use of the Norden occurred in 1967, when Navy Squadron VO67 used Norden-equipped aircraft to drop sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Then, finally, the Norden was retired. By the late 1960s, surplus stores sold them for $25 each. The device that had cost $7,500 during the war and required $1.5 billion to develop was now worth less than a used bicycle. The story of the Norden Bombsight is the story of the Norden Bombsight is the story of technological optimism meeting operational reality. Under controlled conditions, it performed near miracles. But warfare is not conducted under controlled conditions. Warfare is chaos, violence, fear, and death. Technology can shape warfare, but it cannot eliminate its fundamental nature. The men who flew over Germany learned this lesson at terrible cost. Consider what $1.5 billion represented in 1940s money. It was enough to build thousands of additional bombers, hundreds of thousands of bombs, entire air bases, training facilities for tens of thousands of additional crew members. The Manhattan Project, which literally changed the course of human history, cost less than twice as much. The Norden program absorbed resources that could have been deployed in countless other ways. Was it worth it? The question is impossible to answer definitively. The Norden enabled the daylight precision bombing doctrine. That doctrine, flawed though it was, committed the United States to a specific path in the air war over Europe. Without the Norden, would American strategy have been different, better, worse? We cannot know. What we do know is that the gap between what was promised and what was delivered was enormous. The Norden was marketed as a war-winning superweapon. It was classified higher than nearly any other military technology. Bombardiers swore oaths to protect its secrets. Guards watched it constantly. Yet despite all the secrecy, all the expense, all the faith placed in it, the Norden could not overcome the fundamental difficulties of dropping explosives from high altitude onto targets defended by the most advanced air defense system ever created. It was plenty hot, he told his hometown newspaper, and those German fighters were too good. He carried 5 American dimes with him on every raid, his lucky charm. He kept them for the rest of his life. Thousands of other men were not so fortunate. They lie in military cemeteries across Europe, or their names are inscribed on walls commemorating the missing. They believed in their mission. They believed in their equipment. They believed in precision bombing. They climbed into their bombers day after day, knowing that statistically they probably wouldn't survive their 25-mission combat tour. The bombardiers deserve particular recognition. Nothing but thin transparency between them and flak, fighters, and 4 miles of empty air. They hunched over their Norden bombsights, making minute adjustments while the world tried to kill them. When their planes were fatally hit, they had the worst escape route: bail out through the nosewheel well, hoping not to be struck by the aircraft's tail as it passed. Many never made it out. Their sacrifice was in service of a doctrine that promised precision and delivered area bombardment. The question of whether that sacrifice was worthwhile haunted veterans and historians for decades. The technology itself represents a particular moment in military history. The Norden was perhaps the last great mechanical analog computer designed for warfare. After World War II, electronic computers rapidly supplanted mechanical ones. Radar guidance replaced visual sighting. Guided missiles rendered bombsights obsolete. The B-47 Stratojet, America's first swept-wing jet bomber, used a radar bombing system. The B-52, which entered service in the 1950s, was designed from the beginning for radar bombing. The age of the Norden was over almost before it began. Its period of primacy was less than a decade. The technology that cost so much to develop was obsolete before the men who used it had finished fighting. Yet the Norden's legacy persisted. It established American faith in technological solutions to military problems. It demonstrated that even brilliant engineering cannot guarantee success in combat. It showed that secrecy and security cannot protect a technology once it enters mass production. Thousands of workers built Nordens, hundreds of thousands of airmen trained on them. Enemies captured them from downed aircraft. No amount of classification could keep the technology truly secret. The Norden myth proved more durable than the Norden reality. Even today, references to pickle barrel accuracy appear in discussions of military technology, usually without awareness that the phrase originated as marketing hyperbole for a device that never achieved such accuracy operationally. The United States learned lessons from the Norden experience, though not necessarily the right ones. The idea that technology could enable clean, precise warfare persisted. It would re-emerge in different forms throughout the Cold War and beyond. Laser-guided bombs, GPS-guided munitions, cruise missiles, drones. Each new technology promised unprecedented precision. Each delivered improvements over previous generations. But each also encountered the same fundamental problem that limited the Norden. Combat is chaos. Targets are defended. Intelligence is imperfect. Human judgment is required at critical moments. Technology alone cannot overcome these challenges. The men who flew the missions understood this intuitively, even if they couldn't articulate it. They trusted their equipment as much as any combat soldier trusts his weapon. But they also knew that survival depended on luck, skill, courage, and the performance of every crew member. The Norden was just a tool, an expensive, sophisticated, heavily guarded tool, but still just a tool. It did not win battles. Men won battles, using whatever tools they had available. The final irony is that the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were aimed using Norden bombsights. The B-29 Enola Gay that destroyed Hiroshima carried a Norden. So did Boxcar, which bombed Nagasaki. These were the most important bombing missions in history, the missions that ended the war. They succeeded not because of the Norden's precision, but because the bombs were so powerful that precision hardly mattered. A device that could level an entire city did not require pinpoint accuracy. The Norden's greatest contribution to history was guiding weapons that rendered the Norden's promised precision irrelevant. It's a strange epitaph for a device that cost $1.5 billion and missed 90% of its targets. In the decades after the war, Carl Norden retired to Switzerland. He avoided publicity. He was not proud of the bombsight as an end product, his son later explained. Norden believed the United States was the last hope of Western civilization against fascism. The bombsight was just a device to win the war. He would not have liked the fuss made about it. Norden died in Zurich on June 14, 1965, at age 85. He was remembered as a brilliant engineer, a difficult personality, and the creator of one of World War II's most famous but misunderstood technologies. The mathematics of war are brutal and simple. The 8th Air Force flew 273,841 attacking sorties during World War II. It lost 4,182 aircraft, a loss rate of 1.5%. Of the 250,000 aircrew members who flew bomber missions, 58,000 became casualties, 18,000 killed, 6,500 wounded, 33,500 missing. The price of the daylight bombing campaign was paid in blood and aluminum, not in dollars. The $1.5 billion spent on the Norden was trivial compared to the human cost. Was it worth it? The question assumes a counterfactual that cannot be known. What would have happened without the Norden? Would American forces have adopted night bombing like the British, with even worse accuracy? Would they have focused resources elsewhere? Would the war have ended differently? These questions have no answers. History happened as it happened. The Norden existed, it was used, it shaped doctrine and tactics. Men trained on it, trusted it, and died while using it. That cannot be changed. What can be examined is the gap between promise and performance. In this, the Norden represents a cautionary tale. Technological sophistication does not guarantee operational success. Marketing claims should not be confused with battlefield reality. Security and secrecy do not ensure technological advantage. Expensive does not mean effective. These lessons were learned by the men who flew over Germany in 1943 and 1944. They are lessons that each generation must relearn, usually at great cost. The Norden Bombsight sits today in museums. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum displays the Norden that was carried aboard Enola Gay. Other examples are scattered in military museums across America. They are impressive artifacts. The mechanical complexity is evident even to casual observers. The precision machining, the intricate gear trains, the carefully ground optical elements, all speak to extraordinary engineering skill. But the bombsights in museums are silent about their operational record. They do not explain that 90% of bombs dropped using Norden sights missed their targets by more than 1,000 feet. They do not account for the $1.5 billion spent on their development. They do not speak for the men who died trusting in their accuracy. Perhaps that's appropriate. War museums are places of remembrance, not judgment. The men who flew the bombing missions did their duty with courage and honor. The engineers who designed the Norden applied their considerable skills to solving an extraordinarily difficult problem. The planners who built doctrine around daylight precision bombing did so with the best intentions. The gap between intention and result, between promise and performance, between theory and reality, is the space where history actually occurs. The Norden Bombsight fills that space with 2,000 meticulously crafted parts, $1.5 billion in development costs, and the memories of men who climbed into their bombers every morning, not knowing if they would return. The bomber offensive against Germany succeeded in helping to win the war, though not in the way its architects imagined. It did not achieve the surgical precision promised by the Norden. It did not destroy Germany's war economy through targeted strikes on key industries. It did achieve other effects. It forced Germany to divert massive resources to defense. It gave the Western Allies a way to strike at Germany before the invasion of France. It supported the ground campaign once invasion began. It maintained pressure on Germany from multiple directions simultaneously. These were meaningful contributions. They were not, however, what the Norden was designed to accomplish. In the end, the story of America's $1.5 billion bombsight that missed 90% of its targets is a story about the limits of technology, the persistence of hope, and the courage of men who flew into impossible situations with imperfect tools. It's a story about the difference between laboratory conditions and combat conditions, between marketing claims and operational reality, between what engineers promise and what soldiers experience. It's a reminder that in war, as in life, outcomes depend more on human factors than technological ones. Courage matters more than computing power. Persistence matters more than precision. The will to continue matters more than the sophistication of equipment. David Palmer, the 20-year-old pilot from Polbrook, understood this. So did the thousands of other young men who climbed into their bombers day after day. They trusted their Norden bombsights because they had to. They believed in precision bombing because they needed to believe their sacrifices had purpose. But they also knew, in ways that planners in Washington could never fully comprehend, that survival was a combination of skill, luck, courage, and the performance of 9 other men in their aircraft. The Norden was just one more piece of equipment. Important, yes, but not decisive. Never decisive. The empty spaces at breakfast tables after missions were caused by bombsight failures. They were caused by war. The Norden could not protect the men who used it. It could not guarantee their survival. It could not ensure that their bombs hit true. It could only do what any tool does: provide a mechanical advantage when conditions allowed. Sometimes those conditions existed. More often, they did not. And in those moments, when fighters attacked and flak burst, and the Norden's carefully calculated solutions became meaningless because the pilot had to dive to avoid collision, the men fought with whatever they had: their training, their courage, their loyalty to each other. The Norden was along for the ride. This is perhaps the most important lesson. Technology shapes warfare. It does not determine it. Men determine outcomes, their decisions under pressure, their performance when exhausted and terrified, their ability to adapt when plans fail. The Norden bombsight represented the best of American technological capability in the 1940s. It was a genuine achievement of engineering, but it could not, ultimately, overcome the fundamental chaos of combat. No technology ever has. None ever will. The men who fought understood this. We would do well to remember it.